The Lancet had been in flight for 40 seconds when it stopped going toward the Ukrainian position it had been launched at and started going toward the Russian armored vehicle it destroyed instead. In early May, Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists operating in eastern Ukraine executed an operation that represents something genuinely rare in the history of modern warfare: the successful interception and redirection of an adversary's precision-guided munition against the adversary's own assets. A Russian Lancet loitering munition, launched by Russian operators against a Ukrainian position, was captured mid-flight by Ukrainian electronic warfare systems, its guidance link severed from its original operators and replaced by a Ukrainian control signal, and redirected toward a Russian T-72 that was operating in the same sector. The Lancet struck the T-72. The Russian operators who had launched it watched their own weapon destroy their own tank. What followed in the sector in the hours after this operation was visible not only in the destroyed Russian vehicle, but in the disruption to Russian drone operations that the awareness of Ukrainian interception capability created. Russian drone operators, who became aware that their Lancets were being captured and redirected, did not simply continue operating as before. They introduced additional protocols, reduced their operational tempo, and accepted the friction of uncertainty about whether the next Lancet they launched would reach its intended target or would be turned against them. This is the story of how Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists achieved what Russian drone operators had never prepared to defend against. And this is what Russia paid for it. The Lancet loitering munition is one of Russia's most operationally significant precision strike systems in Ukraine. Unlike the FPV drones that require a continuous line-of-sight control link from an operator close to the front, the Lancet uses a combination of inertial navigation and video-guided terminal homing that allows it to be launched from a greater distance, to loiter over a target area searching for targets, and to engage targets that the launching operator identifies through the drone's video feed. It has been used extensively against Ukrainian artillery systems, armored vehicles, and air defense assets, the specific high-value targets that warrant the Lancet's more sophisticated guidance relative to simple FPV systems. The guidance architecture that makes the Lancet effective is also the source of its vulnerability to the specific type of electronic warfare attack that Ukrainian specialists executed. The Lancet's guidance link, the communications channel between the drone and its ground control station, is a radio frequency signal. Like every radio frequency signal, it can in principle be disrupted, spoofed, or replaced by a stronger signal on the same frequency that overrides the original control. The technical challenge of actually executing this against a moving target in flight is substantial. It requires precise frequency matching, sufficient signal strength to overcome the original control link, and the processing speed to assume guidance of a moving drone before it can respond to the loss of its original control signal. But the theoretical possibility exists, and Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists have been working toward the practical execution of exactly this capability for an extended period. The operation that succeeded in early May was not the first Ukrainian attempt at Lancet guidance interception. It was the product of an extended technical development program that progressed from theoretical analysis of the Lancet's guidance frequencies through progressively successful partial interceptions in which the drone was disrupted but not controlled, to the full guidance takeover that produced the outcome described in this video. The specialists who executed the operation had accumulated the specific technical knowledge of the Lancet's guidance system, the operational procedures for deploying their interception equipment at the right distance and orientation relative to the drone's flight path, and the real-time guidance skills required to redirect a drone that is in flight toward a new target. The conditions required for a successful interception are specific and not easily replicated at will. The Ukrainian EW system must be within effective signal range of the Lancet during its flight. The Lancet's flight path must be predictable enough that interception equipment can be positioned in advance. The interception must occur at a point in the Lancet's flight where sufficient time and fuel remain for redirection to a new target at a meaningful distance from the original approach trajectory. And the Russian operators who launched the Lancet must not have the technical capability to override the Ukrainian interception signal and restore their original guidance. On this occasion, all of those conditions were met. Ukrainian electronic warfare teams had developed intelligence about the sector's Russian Lancet launch procedures, the positions from which launches were typically conducted, the flight profiles the drones typically followed, the timing patterns that characterized Russian Lancet employment in the sector. This intelligence allowed the positioning of interception equipment at locations and orientations that maximized the probability of successful guidance capture. The Lancet that was intercepted flew the profile that Ukrainian analysts had predicted. The interception occurred at a point in the flight that left sufficient capability to redirect toward the Russian T-72 that Ukrainian operators had selected as the redirection target. The Russian operators watching their drone's video feed saw something they could not immediately explain. The Lancet's camera was showing terrain that was not in the direction of the Ukrainian position they had targeted. The drone was turning. They attempted to override, to restore their own guidance signal, and redirect the Lancet back toward its intended target. The Ukrainian interception signal was stronger. The override failed. The Lancet continued toward the T-72. The impact produced the characteristic secondary explosion of a tank struck by a precision munition, the shaped charge penetrating into the vehicle and initiating the ammunition detonation that, in T-72 variants, typically results in the catastrophic destruction of the vehicle. The T-72 that had been operating inside Russian-controlled territory, posing no threat to its own forces under normal circumstances, was destroyed by the weapon that Russian operators had intended for a Ukrainian position. The awareness of what had happened spread through Russian drone operations in the sector within hours. Not through any Ukrainian announcement. Ukrainian forces did not publicize the operation through official channels at that time, but through the reports of the operators who had witnessed their own Lancet turn, through the communication of the T-72 crew's loss to the command elements responsible for the sector, and through the Russian military intelligence assessment of what the evidence indicated had occurred. The response among Russian drone operators in the sector was exactly what Ukrainian EW specialists had intended as a secondary effect. Uncertainty about whether a launched Lancet would reach its target or would be captured and redirected introduced friction into every subsequent launch decision. Operators who would previously have launched with confidence based on the calculation of target value versus Lancet cost now had to factor in the possibility that their launch would destroy their own assets. The additional protocols introduced to reduce this risk, confirmation checks, additional frequency monitoring, operational pauses while the threat was assessed, reduced the operational tempo of Russian Lancet employment in the sector. This secondary disruption effect, the psychological and procedural friction introduced into Russian drone operations by the awareness of Ukrainian interception capability, is an operational benefit that extends beyond the direct material consequences of the single interception. A Russian drone operations element that has experienced the possibility of its own weapons being redirected against itself does not operate with the same confidence as one that has not. The uncertainty compounds over time, affecting planning, affecting launch decisions, affecting the integration of Lancet operations into the broader fires coordination that makes them most effective. Now let us examine the direct costs of this engagement. The Russian T-72 destroyed by the redirected Lancet carries a replacement cost of $3 to $4 million USD under current Russian production conditions, the same baseline cost as other T-72 losses in this conflict. The crew, accounting for training investment and the operational cost of replacing them, $150,000 to $300,000. The Lancet itself, the redirected munition that destroyed the T-72, has an estimated unit cost of $35,000 to $50,000 per system. In operational terms, this is the cost of a weapon that Russia paid for, deployed, and had used against itself. The operational disruption to Russian Lancet employment in the sector during the period following the interception, the reduced tempo, the additional protocols, the uncertainty that increased decision friction, represents a foregone operational effectiveness that is difficult to quantify precisely, but that affected every Russian Lancet launch decision in the sector for the following days and weeks. Total direct material cost, $3.2 to $4.4 million USD. The more significant cost is the operational disruption and the intelligence value of demonstrating that Ukrainian forces have developed a capability that Russian drone operators had not previously had to account for. The intelligence dimension of this operation is itself significant. Russian electronic warfare and drone development programs will now devote resources to understanding and countering the guidance interception capability that Ukrainian specialists demonstrated. They will attempt to develop frequency hopping protocols, encryption improvements, and signal strength measures that reduce the probability of future successful interceptions. Each of these countermeasure development efforts diverts resources from other priorities and takes time to develop and deploy. Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists who developed and executed this interception capability will be working in parallel, studying Russian responses, identifying the vulnerabilities in the countermeasures being deployed, and developing the next generation of interception techniques that address the updated Russian guidance architecture. The competition continues, but it continues with Ukrainian electronic warfare having demonstrated a capability that will force Russian drone development to respond, a response that costs Russian resources, takes Russian development time, and produces countermeasures that Ukrainian specialists are already working to overcome. Russia launched a Lancet at a Ukrainian position. Ukraine caught it mid-flight. Ukraine redirected it. Russia's Lancet destroyed Russia's tank. In 40 seconds of controlled flight, Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists demonstrated something that changes how Russian drone operators must think about every Lancet they launch. The weapon that is supposed to be their precision fires capability became, for 40 seconds, a Ukrainian fires asset. Ukraine intercepts what Russia aims at Ukraine. Ukraine redirects what Russia launches. Ukraine holds against weapons that Ukraine can turn back on the force that fired them. The Lancet struck the T-72. The T-72 was Russian. The EW specialists who made it happen are Ukrainian. And the sector of the Eastern Front where this occurred is a sector where Russian drone operators now launch with a question they did not have before. Will this Lancet reach my target or will it reach me? Ukraine introduced that question. Ukraine holds the Eastern Front, where Russia now has to answer it before every launch. To understand the full dimensions of what this operation achieved, it is necessary to examine the specific place that Lancet loitering munitions occupy in Russian military operations in Ukraine, and why an operation that introduces uncertainty into Lancet employment produces effects that extend far beyond the single destroyed vehicle. The Lancet has been one of Russia's most effective precision strike systems in this conflict. Its combination of loitering capability, video-guided terminal homing, and warhead effectiveness against armored targets has made it the go-to system for engaging high-value Ukrainian military assets at standoff ranges. Confirmed Ukrainian losses to Lancet strikes include self-propelled artillery systems, armored fighting vehicles, air defense components, and command and communications assets. The precision of the system, its ability to strike a specific vehicle or system rather than an area, has made it particularly effective against the category of Ukrainian assets whose individual loss is most operationally significant. Russian forces have invested in Lancet production and deployment accordingly. The system appears in greater quantities in the eastern Ukrainian theater than almost any other precision strike platform in Russia's inventory. The operational tempo of Lancet employment, the frequency of launches, and the proportion of launched drones that achieve confirmed kills has been a persistent source of attrition against Ukrainian high-value assets. Ukrainian forces have developed multiple responses to the Lancet threat over the course of the conflict. Decoy systems, objects designed to look like high-value targets from drone altitude, have been deployed to absorb Lancet strikes that would otherwise have destroyed functional equipment. Camouflage and concealment disciplines have been updated to account for the specific sensors that Lancet terminal guidance uses for target identification. Position changes and movement discipline have been used to reduce the probability that a Lancet launched against an assessed location finds an operational asset rather than an empty position. Each of these responses is partially effective and imposes its own operational costs. Decoys cost resources to manufacture and deploy. Camouflage disciplines reduce the operational efficiency of the systems being concealed. Movement discipline creates the timing and coordination overhead of constant repositioning. None of these responses eliminates the Lancet threat. They manage it. The guidance interception capability that Ukrainian EW specialists demonstrated in this operation is qualitatively different from all previous Ukrainian responses to the Lancet. It does not manage the threat by reducing the Lancet's probability of finding and hitting its target. It manages the threat by introducing the possibility that the Lancet will hit a Russian target instead. The psychological and procedural burden this places on Russian operators. The necessity of evaluating the interception risk before each launch. The introduction of uncertainty into what had been a confidence-generating capability changes how Russian forces can use the system in ways that passive countermeasures cannot achieve. A Russian drone operator who launches a Lancet with confidence is contributing to Russian fire's effectiveness with minimal decision overhead. A Russian drone operator who launches a Lancet knowing that Ukrainian EW forces have demonstrated the capability to intercept and redirect guidance is accepting a risk that the weapon they are launching may end up targeting their own assets. That risk changes the decision calculus. It may not prevent launches. The operational requirement for precision fires against Ukrainian targets remains, but it adds friction to every launch decision in ways that compound across the operational tempo of Lancet employment. The additional protocols that Russian operators introduced following the interception, the confirmation checks, the frequency monitoring, the operational pauses while interception risk is assessed, each add time and overhead to what had been a relatively fluid operational process. Time and overhead in drone operations translate directly to reduced operational tempo, fewer launches per day, more decision friction per launch. Less efficient integration of Lancet strikes into the broader fires coordination that makes them most effective. Ukrainian EW specialists who developed this interception capability were solving a specific technical problem: how to capture guidance of a system that is designed with awareness that adversaries will attempt exactly this. The Lancet's developers were not naive about the electronic warfare threat. They designed the guidance system with awareness of that threat and implemented measures intended to make interception difficult. The Ukrainian specialists who developed a working interception technique did so against a system that was designed to resist their effort. This is an indicator of the technical sophistication that Ukrainian electronic warfare has developed. Not just the ability to disrupt or jam, which is the most basic electronic warfare capability, but the ability to take positive control of a system that its developers work to protect from exactly that capability. The gap between disruption and control is a significant technical gap, and Ukrainian specialists have crossed it. The Russian electronic warfare and drone development programs that will now attempt to close that gap face the same fundamental challenge that any defender faces against a capability that has been demonstrated against their system. They know the general category of the attack, but not the specific technical implementation. They must develop countermeasures against an attack method whose details they can infer but not observe directly. Their countermeasures will be designed against their best assessment of how the interception was done, and Ukrainian specialists will be working against those countermeasures. The intelligence value of demonstrating this capability, of forcing Russian drone development to respond, diverting resources from other priorities, introducing uncertainty into Russian operator training and doctrine, is a multiplier on the direct operational benefit of the single interception that was executed. Russia now has to solve a problem that, before this engagement, it did not know existed in practice, rather than in theory. Solving that problem costs resources, time, and development capacity that was previously allocated to other priorities. One interception, one tank, one question introduced into every subsequent Russian Lancet launch, one development program forced into defensive response. Ukraine executes what Russia thought was impossible to defend against. Ukraine creates uncertainty where Russia had confidence. Ukraine holds the front against a force that is now less certain of its own weapons. The Eastern Front in early May is a front where Russian drone operators have a question they did not have before. Ukraine gave them that question. Ukraine holds the ground where they are trying to answer it. There is a final dimension of this operation that belongs in the record, the one that connects the technical achievement of guidance interception to the soldiers on both sides who experience its consequences. The Russian T-72 crew that was destroyed by their own side's redirected Lancet were not responsible for the guidance architecture vulnerability that Ukrainian specialists exploited. They were operating their vehicle in a sector where Lancet operations were ongoing, doing the work that armored vehicle crews do in eastern Ukraine, covering ground, supporting infantry, contributing to the Russian operational effort. They died because Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists had spent months developing the capability that turned a Russian weapon against a Russian target in 40 seconds. The Ukrainian EW specialists who executed the operation had been working toward this outcome for a long time before it was possible. The technical development, the frequency analysis, the progressive interception attempts, the operational testing that progressed from disruption to partial control to full redirection is the product of sustained effort over an extended period. The moment of the operation was 40 seconds. The preparation was months. The Russian operators who watched their Lancet turn will remember it. The uncertainty that the memory creates, the question of whether the next Lancet will do the same, is a burden that follows them into every subsequent launch decision. That burden is also part of what this operation achieved. Ukraine develops what Russia thought was safe from development. Ukraine executes what Russia thought was impossible. Ukraine holds against weapons that now carry a risk to the force that fires them. The redirected Lancet struck the T-72. The question Ukraine introduced into Russian drone operations remains unanswered. And the Eastern Front holds against a force that is now slightly less certain of its own weapons than it was before.